Hi everybody, Joshua here. I wanted to share some words of Torah about Parshat Chukat, this Shabbos' Torah portion. We had seen the topic of our discussion a few months ago, right before Purim, during Shabbat Parah, namely the mysterious ritual of the Red Heifer, and I had something else I wanted to say about it. So here we go. This is called Unburdened by the Yoke. In discussing the famously mystifying offering which begins our Parsha, the ritual of the Red Heifer, the detail that is most often focused on is its purity of hue. As Rashi points out, drawing from the Midrash, its hair must be almost entirely red. Merely 2 strands of black hair would render it invalid. However, in this Devar Torah, I'd like to focus on another aspect of the ritual, which tends to get less attention: the yoke. The main verse describing the heifer reads, "This is the ritual law God commanded. Instruct the people of Israel to bring you a pure, timimah, red cow without blemish, upon which a yoke has never been placed." The Hebrew word for pure in the verse, timimah, can also mean innocent. This is an animal that has existed in a protected, sheltered state. It has been allowed to graze free, unaffected by the costs of labor, unimpacted by human will. In terms of the details of how to facilitate this offering, God relays the instructions not only to Moses, the common recipient of God's teaching, but also to Aharon. Given its ritual nature, you might imagine that Aaron would be the one receiving the instructions, at least the first time around, not the one providing them. This ambiguity is clarified in the very next verse, in which we learn who is to be charged with the responsibility of performing the offering. It reads, "Give the heifer to Eleazar the priest, take it outside the camp and slaughter it in his presence." And to take a step back for a moment. The red heifer offering was a ritual of immense power and importance. Its appearance is regarded as a miraculous event. The next time one is reported to have been offered was during the reign of Ezra the scribe, hundreds of years later. This mysterious ritual cleansed those who have been impacted by the trauma of death, infused with tumat mate, kept away from the sacred. This momentous occasion spiritually resets an entire group of people who were touched by something they could not control. So one might imagine, that its responsibility would be laid at the feet of the high priest, not the Sgan Kohen, the second in command. Not only that, but if we read the verse closely, it seems like it is any old priest that slaughters the animal, since it is done in Eleazar's presence, that is, not by him. So we have the instructions being given to the second banana Kohen, and not only that, but it's some random Shmo Kohen, a Shmohain, who does the shchita, who does the slaughtering. This is surprising considering that the ritual is such a big deal. Now the commentators also react with confusion why this transcendently important ritual is delegated to the second in charge. Rashi insists that this was on purpose, writing, "The mitzvah of the red heifer is always for the skan." He even goes so far as to say that a zar, non-priest, literally a stranger, is the one who slaughters it, while Eleazar supervises. So, not only is the seemingly sacred nature of the sacrifice deflated by passing it on to the second most important priest, instead of the first, but it's not even a Kohen who performs the powerful act of taking its life. In Sifrei Parsha 123, the Tannaitic Midrash on Bamidbar, we see an important opinion by a number of rabbis saying that while the red heifer in the desert was performed by Eleazar, the assistant to the Kohen Gadol, still a big deal. The red heifers in the future are to be done by any old priest. This seemingly democratizing element, that this transcendentally significant ritual does not have to be restricted to the most select priest, could be coming to teach us that cleansing is available to all. We do not need a singular sacred individual to bring us healing when we need it. In truth, it is all around us. A normal priest can facilitate this ritual, and not just that, but even a normal guy can help bring it to its fruition. So now that we've learned that healing is all around us, the Devar Torah is over. Good shot. No, I'm just kidding. I've got more to say. Other commentators see a bit more intention in God's targeting of Eleazar. Ramban, in his Torah commentary, writes that this could have been a protection of Aaron, since the ritual was not performed in the tabernacle area, but rather in its outskirts, in front of the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, which is a profane area, not the sacred area of the temple. Again, this element could come to teach us that the work of healing is not sanctioned off in a protected zone, but rather must be performed in the real world. The temple, after all, had to be protected from Tuma. So how could the ritual to cleanse us from Tuma be performed there? Instead, we see the commitment of God to bring healing to the people, as the Talmud envisions God declaring, "Whoever wants to become cleansed, I will help them." While Aharon HaKohen was restricted to stay in the sancta, the Holy One is not. The healing power of God cannot be restrained, but rather must go out to be accessible to those who need it. However, some commentators push back even on that notion of shelter, that the high priest must be protected from the power of death, which the red heifer is intended to dispel. Nachmanides cites a Gemara in which Rebbe Yehuda specifies that our verse's specificity provides us with necessary information, while it must be transmitted to Elazar, i.e. this para aduma, this red heifer. Future red heifers are to be offered by the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. Indeed, Mishnah Para 4:1 contains a ruling that if the Kohen Gadol is not the one who sacrifices it, it is invalid. It's puzzle. One could see this as a reaction to the potential diminution of stature implied above, that it can only be done by the most elect individual. However, here, a fascinating detail of the ritual must be introduced that changes everything we have discussed so far. After performing the sacrifice, Moses and Aaron instruct Elazar that he must wash his clothes and cleanse his body in water, and only afterward can he come back to the camp. The priest who performed the ritual will be unclean until evening. Perhaps this consequence is that from which the above commentators have tried to protect the high priest, that the unavoidable result of performing this ritual is that one is impacted by impurity oneself. To clarify, the priest that is in charge of cleansing and purifying the entire nation, the ritual that does that healing, that cleansing, ends up making that priest impure. How could we assign this role to Aaron, who must be kept pure at all times? This fascinating and controversial detail teaches us something essential about the work of healing. In engaging in such holy labor, one must expect to delve into the depths of what one is trying to heal, and one must anticipate being impacted in its wake, impressed by the real force of that with which one is engaging. And the para aduma, the red heifer, which cleanses us of death's touch, cannot be performed in the rarefied air of the temple. It must be performed in the midst of that which it is healing. If the high priest is the one to whom this function is assigned, it also teaches us something about what it means to be unclean. That happens to anyone too. That is, being unclean, having tuma, does not serve as a referendum on one's quality as a person, that one has been impacted by tragedy. The Torah is clear that tuma is not a state with moral significance, but is rather a regulated period in which one is commanded to take the time and space one needs to heal. This is the real and tangible result of what it is to be touched by something one cannot control. God provides this ritual to ensure that we can reintegrate once the process has been completed. That the one who heals us leaves the ritual impacted by the same state is a radical act of leveling. Death is not the opposite of, but is an integrated aspect of life. So, why must the red heifer be unworked, unburdened by yoke, unimpacted by human will? The Tur, in his commentary, insists that the deficient spelling of the word ol, when I say deficient, what I mean is that it doesn't have the vowel spelled out. It doesn't have a vav in there. It's just ayin lamed. That more minimalist spelling implies that if a yoke was placed on it for even a moment, it would be disqualified. And this specification is unique to the red heifer, as the Vilna Gaon, in his Torah commentary, Aderet Eliyahu, underscores that working other kodshim, sacred offerings, does not disqualify them. You can use other potential sacrifices to work in the field, and you can still sacrifice them. But in the case of the para aduma, it can't be worked. Perhaps the contrast with the red heifer is that it is not a kodesh at all, since it is offered outside the temple grounds, in the midst of the profane and the impure. It shows us that innocence is not something that is protected, but is rather something vulnerable. One could imagine that the unworked, unblemished heifer would only be allowed to remain in the sheltered grounds of the temple, protected from all danger, physical and spiritual. And that is true, for a bit. But then it is brought into the world to restore innocence to the people as a whole. It serves as a paradigm for us as well. We too, at first, live our lives with innocence, unburdened. But as we go on and life progresses, we encounter more and more that impacts us, that leaves a mark. We could then draw the conclusion that innocence is a stage in our lives, located strictly in the past. But that is not so. Innocence recurs. It's not an undoing of life's events, or of the impact that they leave, but rather an encounter once more with a promise that healing is possible and that you can be cleansed. Shabbat Shalom.